Take a moment to picture an old-fashioned gas station from the 1930s or 1940s. The polished pumps, the uniformed attendant, the smell of fuel in the air. Now imagine that mixed into that gasoline was a toxic metal, lead, not by accident, not by contamination, but deliberately added. For decades, drivers around the world filled their tanks with what was known as leaded gasoline. It powered cars, boosted engine performance, and became the industry standard. No warning labels, no public panic, just another normal part of everyday life. So why? Why would car companies and oil refineries intentionally add lead to fuel? Was it ignorance? Profit? A lack of regulation? Or was there a mechanical reason behind it? Today we're diving into the surprisingly layered story of why lead was added to gasoline in the early days of automobiles, and how a solution to one engine problem ended up creating a global environmental and public health crisis that lasted nearly a century. Right here on History of Simple Things. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, inventors like Carl Benz and Henry Ford helped bring gasoline-powered cars into everyday life. These early engines worked, but they weren't perfect. One major issue was engine knocking, sometimes called pinging. Inside a gasoline engine, fuel and air mix together in a cylinder and are compressed by a piston. At just the right moment, a spark plug ignites the mixture, producing a controlled explosion that pushes the piston down and creates power. But sometimes, the fuel-air mixture would ignite too early or unevenly. Instead of one smooth burn, you'd get multiple mini-explosions. That created a sharp knocking sound and, more importantly, reduced engine efficiency and caused damage over time. As engines became more powerful and used higher compression ratios to increase performance, knocking became an even bigger problem. Automakers needed a fuel that could withstand compression without igniting prematurely. This property is what we now measure as octane rating. The higher the octane, the better the fuel resists knocking. In the early 1900s, gasoline naturally had inconsistent quality. Refining processes were still developing, and fuels often had low octane levels. Engineers began searching for additives that could improve performance. In the 1920s, researchers at General Motors began experimenting with various chemicals to reduce knocking. One of the key figures involved was Thomas Midgley Jr. Midgley and his team tested dozens of substances. Ethanol worked well as an anti-knock additive. So did certain aromatic hydrocarbons. But they were looking for something cheap, effective in small quantities, and easy to produce on a large scale. In 1921, they found it: tetraethyl lead. Just a tiny amount of tetraethyl lead, often abbreviated as TEL, dramatically increased gasoline's octane rating. Engines ran smoother, knocking decreased, performance improved, and because only small quantities were needed, it seemed economically attractive. To commercialize it, General Motors partnered with Standard Oil to form the Ethyl Gasoline Corporation. They branded the fuel simply as ethyl, carefully avoiding the word lead in marketing materials. From a mechanical standpoint, it was a breakthrough. Cars could use higher compression engines, which meant more power and better efficiency. But there was one enormous problem: lead is highly toxic. Even in the 1920s, the dangers of lead were well known. Lead poisoning had been documented for centuries. Workers in factories producing tetraethyl lead began experiencing hallucinations, seizures, and in some cases, death. At one production plant in 1924, several workers died after severe lead exposure. The facility earned the grim nickname, the House of Butterflies, because poison workers reportedly saw insects that weren't there. Despite these incidents, Industry leaders downplayed the risks. Thomas Midgley Jr. himself famously held a press conference in which he poured tetraethyl lead over his hands to demonstrate its supposed safety, though he later took a leave of absence due to lead exposure. Regulatory agencies at the time lacked the structure and authority they would later gain. After some temporary suspensions and investigations, leaded gasoline returned to the market, and it spread quickly. By the 1930s and 1940s, leaded gasoline was standard across much of the world. For decades, cars burned fuel containing tetraethyl lead, releasing lead particles into the air through exhaust. Those particles settled into soil, water, and urban environments. Children living near busy roads were especially vulnerable. Unlike acute poisoning in factories, this was chronic, low-level exposure affecting millions. If lead was dangerous, why did it stay in gasoline for so many decades? Part of the answer is infrastructure and economics. Refineries were built around producing leaded fuel. Automakers designed engines expecting high-octane leaded gasoline. Switching systems would require investment and redesign. There was also industry resistance. Major oil and automotive companies defended lead additives for years, arguing there was insufficient proof of widespread harm. But scientific understanding continued to grow. In the mid-20th century, researchers began detecting rising lead levels in the atmosphere and in human blood samples. One key figure was Claire Patterson, who in the 1960s provided strong evidence that industrial lead, particularly from gasoline, had dramatically increased environmental contamination. His work helped push the conversation forward. In the United States, the newly formed Environmental Protection Agency began regulating lead in gasoline in the 1970s. The phase-out accelerated as catalytic converters, introduced to reduce air pollution, were found to be damaged by leaded fuel. By the mid-1990s, leaded gasoline for on-road vehicles was banned in the U.S. Many other countries followed. The global phase-out continued into the 21st century, and in 2021, the United Nations announced the end of leaded gasoline for cars worldwide. Lead was added to gasoline for a very specific reason: to stop engine knocking and allow higher performance engines. From a narrow engineering perspective in the 1920s, tetraethyl lead seemed like a brilliant solution. Cheap, powerful, and effective in tiny amounts. But that short-term mechanical fix came with long-term consequences. For decades, billions of liters of leaded fuel released toxic particles into the environment, contributing to widespread contamination and measurable public health effects. What began as an innovation to make engines run smoother became a global lesson in unintended consequences. Today, when you see an octane rating at the pump, you're looking at a problem engineers solved without lead, through improved refining techniques, alternative additives, and better engine design. The story of leaded gasoline reminds us of something important. Technological breakthroughs don't exist in isolation. They shape the world far beyond the engine block. And sometimes the real cost of a miracle solution isn't clear until decades later. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of simple things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.